Hello and welcome to the 13th in this series of Django screencasts called Django from the Ground Up. In this episode, we've got a lot to cover because we're actually going to be building out the server that we're going to be deploying our website onto. And I'm making a couple of assumptions here. The first one is that you're using Ubuntu because that's what we started with and that's what I'm familiar with. So if you're using Red Hat or Fedora or Gentoo or anything else, you're going to need to seriously adapt this to be different. The other thing is that I'm already also assuming that you've already pointed a DNS to your server because I personally use GoDaddy, but I know a lot of people use DNS Cloud, and there's the DNS provided by your hosting provider, like if you've got SliceHost or something like that. Also, you could be running your own DNS. There's just so many options out there. I don't feel like I can really distill that down for you. So I'm assuming that you've got, in this episode, you've got startthedark.com pointed to the server, and also that you've got media.startthedark.com pointed to the server. And that's sort of just one of the base assumptions that I make. So what we want to do is there's a ton of different things we want to install. So I'm going to do sudo apt-get install apache 2 npm prefork. Also libapache 2 mod wsgi. Also nginx, which we're going to use as our reverse proxy and media server. memcached and PostgreSQL 8.3. A lot of stuff to install, but thankfully Ubuntu's apt-get or Debian's apt-get will figure it all out for us. One thing that some people ask is why are you installing nginx at all? What's it for? Well, it's for two things. One thing is that for a lot of different use cases, the web server is actually faster to generate all the data than the client is to grab it. So if you can have a really lightweight process that's serving that data and free up that heavyweight Django process to process a new request, that's the way to go. Also, you don't want to use a heavyweight Django process to serve static media files. So we're going to use that for that. And what I'd like to do is create a new user where we can basically make the home directory of all of this new stuff. So sudo add user, start the dark, and it's going to be their home directory is going to be var www.startthedark.com, and it's going to ask, enter new Unix password. And it's going to ask us for all this information. We can just hit enter because it's not really important. And there we go. We have now changed over to adding a new user. I'm going to change to that user. And the next thing I want to do is I'm going to set up my Git and my Python stuff that I'm going to need. So I'm going to cd to the root directory. You can put this wherever you want. I'm just doing this because it's super easy. I'm going to put it right at the root. And I'm going to make dir git, and I'm going to, and I'm not in the sudoers file, so I want to make sure that we've got this new start the dark user in the sudoers file so that we can do things with sudo. So sudo make dir git and type in our new password, and then we are going to chown that directory to start the dark user and start the dark group, and we'll recursively do that on this new Git directory. And we're also I'm going to do the exact same thing for a Python directory as well. And that way we've got a Git and a Python directory. Now, one thing that you remember is if we look at home, we've got an Eric flow, which was what I originally created, and our Start the Dark repository has all been going there. But I'm not really sure that was a good place for it. I just kind of did that because it was easy. So what we really want to do is move that over to our new Git repository location. So I'm going to go a move home Eric flow start the dark, and that's going to go to get start the dark. And apparently I don't have permissions, so let's go into Git and look at what the permissions are. And it looks like Eric flow. So we want to sudo chown start the dark, recursively on start the dark. Lots of start the darks there. So, and you might want to come up with a different user that's not start the dark. You might want to have like a Git user or a whatever, but since this right now this machine's only going to be used for this one thing, I'll just leave it at that. The next thing that I want to do is I want to go into the Python directory and actually get some of the projects that we want. So I'm going to do svn checkout, and we're going to do http Django Pagination.googlecode.com svn trunk as Django Pagination. Oh, I don't have Subversion installed. I have to install that quickly. And make sure we say yes to that. As you can tell, this is a completely blank slate. I haven't set anything up yet on this box. And now we're checking out Django Pagination. And I have off screen, I've got a couple of things to copy and paste here. I've got Django registration, and Django Gravatar, just to sort of speed things up here. And then if you've watched my setting up a Django development environment, you'll know that I have a script called pylink. So we're going to go into these different directories and sudo pylink gravatar, sudo pylink pagination, pylink registration. Now, I know that there are tons better ways to do this, including zc.buildout and all that stuff, but like I said at the beginning of this series, this is how I do everything, and like this is what fits inside my brain. It's worked really well for me so far, and so this is what I'm sharing with you guys. But if anybody wants to provide a zc.buildout script or something like that for this, I would love to see it. Okay, and then one thing I also know is that we're going to be using the dateutil library. So sudo easy install dateutil. And I think this is going to error, so we don't have easy install. Sudo apt-get install python setup tools. Oops. And we will just let that install. And now we can install dateutil, and easy install will just do the right thing, and it's all installed, and we have everything correctly. So now that we have all of the Python and the Git directory set up, let's actually clone the directory in our Start the Dark repository. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say git clone git Start the Dark. And we've got a new Start the Dark. And if you look here, we've got all of our stuff, everything we wanted. So that's exactly perfect. That's exactly what we want. So next thing we need to do is set up Apache. And the way that Ubuntu sets this up, and I think it's great, is that they have sites available and sites enabled. So let's go to sites available. And right now there's just a default site. So we're going to go nano and startthedark.com is what I want this to be called. And virtual host star, and as I understand, this is going to change, and you'll need to put a :80, but for right now it's just star. I'm not sure if :80 will work yet. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say server admin flowguy@gmail.com, and obviously you change that with your address. Server name is going to be startthedark.com, and then I'll do a server alias as media.startthedark, and server alias as startthedark.com, and then we'll do a document root at var www.startthedark.com, and then I like to and then start the dark, and then media, because if we're actually going to show a document root, we want it to probably be the media, even though we won't ever use this document root. And then this is the really important part, is we want to do WSGI script alias for root, and everything underneath root is var www.startthedark.com startthedark, and then I have a script, a WSGI script in there called startthedark.wsgi. And unfortunately, that just wrapped around, which I didn't want. But there we go. So now we have a permission denied. Yay! So I'm going to copy this stuff and sudo nano startthedark.com, paste it, and there we go. And now what we need to do is we do sudo a2en site startthedark.com. And we're not going to reload Apache yet because it's not really ready. Well, we can reload Apache. And then now what I'd like to do is set up Postgres. So we're going to cd, or first of all, we want to sudo su Postgres. And then we're going to do create user start the dark. And we'll answer these questions. I don't want it to be a super user, but I do want it to be able to create databases. I want it to be able to create new roles. And you can restrict that more or less if you want. And then we're going to do create DB with the owner being start the dark. Start the dark. Da, 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 da. And then we can exit from Postgres because we don't really care about that anymore. So yeah, that's that. Now let's set up Nginx. So if we do etc Nginx, then we'll notice that there's an nginx.conf and sites available and sites enabled. So let's do nginx.conf and look at what that has in it. So as we can see, we've got some pretty good defaults. We've got worker event connection. We've got basically the stuff we want, including gzip, which is on. But one thing that isn't in there is that we don't have an upstream thing that we can proxy to. Basically, what we want to do is set up an upstream proxy where anything that is going to be dynamic, like anything that would be served by Django, goes to Apache. So the way you do that is you say upstream, and then you name it. Cluster, web cluster is what I'll name it. And then you do something like server 127.0.0.1:8080. Oh, and while I remember, it's going to be important that we change. I forgot to change my to sudo do this, so I'm copying that. Sudo nano nginx.conf and pasting it. And there we go. I also want to remember to change Apache 2 ports.conf to be listen 8080 instead of listen 80 like we were saying before. And that way, that makes this whole proxying back to 8080, that makes make sense. And you can choose any port again, but 8080 is kind of a standard one. So now we want to make a site in the sites available. So right again, there's just this default site, and what we want to do is make a new one. So sudo nano, and we'll name it startthedark.com. And we will start it by a server directive, listen 80. And we're going to say server name is media.startthedark.com, and we're going to say access log will be /var/log/nginx/startthedark.media.access.log. And then we're going to do location match to everything, and we'll say auto index is on. Index will be index.html, and then we'll say root is /var/www/startthedark.com, startthedark media. So this is where we're actually setting up our location for our media stuff. And there we go. We've just set up a media.startthedark.com that has auto indexing and is rooted at startthedark.com/startthedark/media. Perfect. So we also want to do something that proxies back all of our dynamic stuff. And to do that, we'll do this server. We'll say listen 80. And we'll say server name, is startthedark.com and www.startthedark.com. So both of those will work. We'll do access log is at var log nginx startthedark.django.access.log. And we'll say that if, so this is kind of a cool thing, if the host is not this, so I've just given a regular expression, and so this is the beginning of a regular expression. So if the beginning of the host name is not startthedark.com, then we're going to do this. We're going to give a rewrite, and we're going to say to everything beforehand all the way to the end. So we're going to rewrite the entire thing to http startthedark.com, and then we've got a captured regular expression right here. So we're going to do percent or $1, and that will put everything at the end of what we had before. So and we want that to be a permanent redirect. And we can end that little expression. So basically, Nginx has this really cool configuration rule stuff where you can do things like that, using regular expressions and things like that. So otherwise, we're going to match locations that match that, everything underneath the slash, and we'll say proxy pass to HTTP web cluster. If you remember, we set that up in our base, or in our nginx.conf. Oh, and before we stop this, we also need to make sure that we do something, we include something else. Etc. nginx proxy.conf. And we can close out this server. So you may be wondering what goes in proxy.conf. Well, it's a wonderful, wonderful little, very easy to understand script here. And that is going to go proxy.conf. Right there. Of course, all of this makes complete sense and it's not confusing at all. I will actually post this on the blog post accompanying the screencast, so you can copy and paste this for what you want. But mainly what it does is set the real IP and basically set some headers. It determines whether it's a proxy redirect and determines some timeouts and stuff like that. Important things, but if you're not a super user, you don't probably really care about any of that stuff. So now that that is all set up, we're basically ready. We can do sudo etc. init.d nginx restart. Or that didn't look like it worked. So we're going to start it, and it looked like it worked that time because it actually paused for a second, and Maybe it worked before. So now we've got Apache set up, we've got Postgres set up, we've got a user created, we've checked out that repository into the user's directory, and so now we are basically ready to set this whole thing up, and that's what the next screencast will be about. It'll be actually about running the server, getting everything working, and how we can deploy automatically once we've got changes using a great tool called Fabric.